Okay, Warrior Next Door listeners, we have something really special today. We have something special every time we record, right? Because we are
That's our
recording.
hope.
It is. We're recording histories and memories and bringing back ghosts from people who have done amazing things, usually in and around our neighborhood. And there's no exception to today, except for the reason today is a little more exceptional than others is because we've had a chance to interview someone who fought in the Italian campaign. And this
Mm.
is a first for the Warrior Next Door because we have not had a chance to. We had some people who were in the Air Force, the Fifth Air Force, I believe,
Yep.
and we did a couple of episodes early on with people who were part of that, like Patterson of Patterson Steel in Tulsa. He was part of the China, Burma, India theater, and we've covered North Africa because he was part of that. But this is different. This guy that we had a chance to meet through one of our listeners, Dale Baker, introduced us to someone who is still very much with us. His name is John E. Little, and he fought in the Italian campaign for the 34th Infantry Division. And I don't know about you, Ryan, but when Dale reached out to us, we had to delay it a little bit for some personal reasons, and we finally had a chance to meet with him a couple weeks ago. I mean, I can imagine you must have been just as excited as I was.
Oh yeah. I mean, like you said, having a guy that was boots on the ground in Italy, fighting through some of the toughest fighting in Italy at that point. I mean, it really was throughout the whole campaign. There's Anzio, and then they moved up the boot before they got to Rome. All that fighting in there was just some of the toughest. Some say it was the toughest of the war, at least in the European theater. So
And it was
this we knew it was going to be an interesting interview.
totally, and definitely the longest. So just a little bit on the Italian campaign. So I brought in some research. Ryan and I had both. We always do some research for anyone that we feature on a Warrior Next Door podcast. But I've really leaned heavily on the story of World War II, the book called or named "The Story of World War II" by Donald Miller. For anyone who's listened to this podcast for a while, knows that we had Donald Miller on last year, and he also has written a book called Masters of the Air, which became an HBO hit miniseries last year as well. But I got introduced to Donald Miller by reading the story of World War II, and he writes on the Italian campaign, and he says thus. And I just want to set this up because I'm not sure how many of our listeners know much about the forgotten Battle of Italy, which was the longest campaign fought by the Western Allies. He writes, the Italian campaign was a nightmare of mud, misery, and death. It was the longest campaign fought by the Western Allies and a horrid throwback to the useless bloodletting of World War I. The Allies would suffer 312,000 casualties.
Wow.
188,000 of them were Americans. The Germans would lose 435,000 men in a mostly defensive struggle. So both were bled white, but the largest loser was Italy itself. And we're going to talk about that as we go through this interview as well. Things like museums, archives, cathedrals, Monte Cassino, monasteries,
Monasteries,
treasures were blasted and
relics.
burned, relics. There were half starved refugees. And what made this even worse, and Ryan, we've said this in several other episodes because it was true for the winter of 43 and 44, is that the winters that occurred not just on D Day,
Hmm.
not just in the winter following D Day in December of 44, but also in January of 1944, the year before that, were some of the worst winters of the century. So this war was fought when the weather was historically at its worst. And so the Germans had more than weather, which was some of the worst of the century on their side. Hitler moved in frontline forces from Russia and France, including some of the best engineers of the Wehrmacht. There's a lot of talk we're going to hear from John about the topography, the mountains, the mud, all these issues. And then they faced one of the most brilliant commanders that the Germans had, Albert Kesselring, who was actually a Luftwaffe general, who was a master at defense. So when Ryan and I talk about meeting someone from Italy, first off, it was an under resourced campaign. It was a campaign that was multinational in nature. It was fed um, by forces from all over the world as really a holding action until D Day, could commence in northern France, where we could attack with much larger forces, much more resources, right into the heart of Germany. So, what made Italy? Why is it so difficult for us to find Italian or Italy veterans? It's because there were fewer Americans there. The casualties were very high, even though it was the longest battle in the war. And it's a relatively forgotten front. Not a lot of people sat down with people from Italy after the war and really wanted to know what happened to them. They were more interested in the big sweeping actions that occurred across France and into Germany. And it's kind of a shame because I don't know about you, Ryan, but doing some more research on the Italian campaign made me feel like it made me feel like how I felt when I do research for some of the guys who fought in the Pacific on those terrible islands in horrible conditions. It was a lot more like that.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think a lot of people, at least not, people who are geeks about it like we are, but what a lot of people tend to forget. I mean, you might think, well, wait a second, I thought Italy was on the side of Germany.
Yeah.
What happened there? And, Italy actually surrendered September the 8th of 1943. And or they basically they're like, all right, we're done. We're
Yeah.
out of here.
Yeah.
So Germany was still there in Italy because they knew they needed to hold the Allies back, and we'd be coming right up the peninsula there and everything. So there was a lot of things, a lot of dynamics happening there. You had Italy basically throwing up their hands and say, we're out. Mussolini fell out of favor at that point. And Germany is still trying to hold it by themselves now, not just with the Italians, but by themselves. And then you have to worry about how were the Italians after they surrendered? Were they trustworthy? What was going on there? I mean, who could you trust when you're in that country? I guess who can you trust when you're in any country for that matter? But anyway, so there's a lot of moving parts with this whole thing, and it's a completely different series of events than what happened in Normandy and how things progressed there.
Absolutely. And we're going to have to stop a couple of times along the way and give people a bit of a timeline so they can stay, so our audience can stay grounded or centered in what was going on generally. So, just a little bit more about John. We're going to run clips in just a second, but he would leave the military as a corporal, a T5, which is generally seen as a squad leader. He would serve in the 34th Infantry Division, 135th Infantry Regiment. So for most divisions have three regiments with about 3,000 men apiece, which the fighting force is about 9,000 men out of a total force of about 16,000. The rest are support troop, heavy weapons, intel, combat engineers, that sort of thing. So he was a grunt. He was an infantryman. He was a rifleman. He served from dates of service were from May 3rd, 1943 until December 7th, 1945, several months after the war ended. And it's going to be like we're going to stop along the way and reinforce some of what John shared with us with some other literature about the campaign. But unless you have anything else to add, Ryan, I say we go ahead and kick the clips.
Just one little tidbit to add.
Yeah.
What was their logo? What was their nickname?
They were
No cheating. No cheating.
Oh,
No,
the Red Bull division, weren't
that's
they?
right. That's
The Red
right.
Bull.
Don't you? No, you're a Monster Energy guy. I was gonna say I thought you were a Red Bull drinker, but no, you're a Monster guy.
I've got my can of Monster right here. In a pinch, I will drink a Red Bull, Ryan. I'm
Maybe
not
Monster
beyond
should
that.
be. Maybe they should be sponsors of our podcast since you just showed their logo. I don't know, but anyway, yeah, they were the Red Bull division. Pretty cool. I love how these guys come up with their names and stuff like that. So yes, all right. Well, I'll go ahead and kick it off. Here we go with the first clip with John Little here.
And do you remember where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor being attacked?
Yes, it was on Sunday afternoon. Of course, back then everybody had to go to church, and we had gotten home from church, and I remember my sister came over and told, she lived across the street, and told my daddy that Papa, turn on the TV. They bombed Pearl Harbor. And we knew a man that lived in the community. He had 5 sons or 4 sons already in the Navy. And I remember the next day, I remember them talking about there'd probably be a war, but the world is so big, the United States, that we'll probably never hear of anybody killed during the war. He had 3 sons killed within 3 months of the war.
Mm.
And he had 2 more, and they sent one of them back home.
I don't think I've ever heard a veteran explain it quite that way, which was the United States was huge, even though we're at war. On the home front, it'll be rare for us to hear about someone who passed away. But as we learned as a country, is, many millions of people would die in this war, over 40 million, 500,000 would die in from the United States and 3 times that wounded. And that he had someone in his own neighborhood that lost most of their sons in this war.
That's the thing that impacted me with his statement. It sounds like there were 6 boys in this family. He lost 3 within 3 months of the war starting. 2 more, he said, died after that. And they sent the last one home. It's like a Saving Private Ryan situation.
Absolutely. And so that it was really, it's heart wrenching to hear how these families suffered and how the mindset from the civilians and then later the citizen soldiers like John who would end up fighting over there, and the families had to change the way they thought about this because it went from, there's this war with the Japanese and we're a big country and we're going to stomp them out. It's not going to take very long. Probably won't be affected by it, to holy crap, everyone's being drafted, everyone's being brought in, and everyone knows someone who has perished and suffered in this in that damn war.
Yeah.
So, at any rate, he also mentions, I think, that he was from Mount Olive, Alabama, and was a farmer. And for people who don't know where that is in Alabama, it's in north central Alabama. The town's got about, according to 2010 census, a little over 4,000 people now. But that's the other thing, is that most of the men who served in the war, because the United States was still largely an agricultural society, were farmers. It was not uncommon for us to
Absolutely.
interview somebody who came from a farm.
I would say the preponderance of people we've interviewed were farm boys.
Absolutely.
Well,
It's really rare for us to interview for somebody who was from the Bronx or the inner city or in a really kind of urban environment.
and perhaps it's just because where Tony and I have lived throughout our interviewing career has been the midsection of the U.S. And that's where a lot of the farmers would have been that we interviewed. So maybe a self-fulfilling thing. If we lived down on the East Coast all of our lives, we probably would have interviewed a lot of dudes out there from those areas. But anyway, I digress. So.
And so something else we didn't say in the beginning is Dale Baker, who heard of the Warrior Next Door through a couple of times that we've been guests on Ray Harris's show, The History of World War II. He's the one that really set all this up, got the Zoom meeting going, and he was there with his daughter, not his daughter, but with was it John Little's granddaughter who was there? Pixie?
That sounds right. I'm
I
not
think
really
that sounds
sure.
right. I think it was his
Yeah.
granddaughter Pixie was there. So he had a support staff to do this, but I just wanted to say that before we got any further, that again, I want to reinforce thanking Dale again. So the other thing that these guys went through before the war, before Pearl Harbor's attacked, was, the Great Depression. And here he is in rural, Alabama. And this next clip speaks a little bit about what it was like during that time. So you grew up on a farm in
Yes,
Alabama during the Great Depression. Did
yes.
you guys feel the effects of the Great Depression? Was it difficult for your family?
No, no. We had our own pork, our own beef, own chicken, own eggs, and they wasn't $7 a dozen. I was telling my daughter on the way over here, we could take a dozen of eggs back then, and they had a little country store, and you would take your eggs that you had left, say a dozen, and you could buy like carry them to that little store, and you would trade them in for stuff that you needed. We'd carry a dozen eggs and get a pound of coffee, a pound of sugar, and stuff like that we absolutely needed. And that's now there's $1 a piece.
Yeah.
So you could tell us was recorded at a time during the eggflation crisis. And he also mentions that his daughter brought him over. So Pixie is his daughter, which is great. And really what he's saying is they bartered for food back then. It was really common. And I wonder what percentage of the United States today has any living memory of having to barter for food. I mean, it's just something that we don't do very commonly. And also, Ryan, it's interesting when we talk to the vets that we've interviewed about their experiences during the Great Depression. It can vary wildly. I'd say most of the time, the vast majority of the time, actually, they say that, things were tight and that they were all suffering together. But there have been, on a couple of occasions, we've met people who maybe were more affluent or had a certain type of job during the Great Depression that was depression proof. We've met people on farms like Bill, who we, for those who don't know, Bill,
Bill Parker.
exactly.
Yep.
We had Bill featured on for D-Day. He was on Omaha Beach. He was also in a rural part of Oklahoma, but he described it as being, very difficult, and they were very, very poor. And he actually became a bull rider to make money. Whereas this guy's saying, and I've heard this before as well with some of the farmers that we've talked to, is the farm produced what they needed, and they actually made through it pretty well.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the benefits of having growing up on a farm. Obviously, you worked sun up to sun down, but you were self-sustaining, and at that time you had everything you needed to from a bare minimum. You had a roof over your head and you had food if you needed it, if you absolutely needed it, and you could go trade it in at the grocery store and get coffee and the things that you can't grow on your farm. So it was a very beneficial arrangement for them.
And a little foreshadowing, he's going to talk later in clips when the 34th Infantry Division makes its way up to the Gothic Line over into Bologna and all that they go from meeting a lot of people on their push up the boot to Italy as they go through Anzio and Rome and all that, who are very poor and needed help, to being in a more agrarian society where the people there were actually doing much better. So I think, what they say, a country boy will survive. I think apparently that is still the case back then, and it probably still is the case today in terms of being able to take care of yourself. And next clip, he's going to speak more about being drafted, being brought into the war. According to the bio that we have from Bill, he was drafted, because I don't think he says a specific date coming up, on May 3rd, 1943. So he was 19 years old when it happened. So go ahead and listen in.
Well, I do remember that if you got to go everywhere you went, you had to have permission. You'd get a pass, like a one-day pass on Sunday. We'd go into Spartanburg. But, they had everything that you needed or wanted on count. They called them PXs back then. I don't know what that would mean today, but that's what they called them at that particular time, was PX. You could buy, they furnished everything. You didn't have to buy hardly anything, unless you just wanted to. And a lot of people would come and pick up. You'd go to the gate, the main gate, and a lot of people would say, well, I can take 5 people home for dinner. And you'd go home with them and have a family cooked meal. But you got to think about this. I've heard this before. You may have, and you may not. That 95% of the GIs had never been out of the state in which they was born.
Yep.
At time, and about 75 had never been out of the county in which they were born in.
Yeah, we've heard that quite a bit. Now you said 95%. I don't know what those numbers are. It wouldn't surprise me if it was that high. He would say later, I didn't include this clip, that he had only left his county once prior to being drafted and brought into the military. And he mentions going to Spartanburg, South Carolina. That was Camp Croft. It was basically a replacement infantry replacement training center. It only operated from 41 to 46. I think it's like a park now with a residential neighborhood. But they
Oh,
trained 60,000 soldiers a year from 41 to 46. That's about 360,000 soldiers. And one of those trainees just happened to be Henry Kissinger.
oh,
Yeah.
really?
So he went to one of these replacement centers. It's 1943, and in 1943 we had been in war about a year and a half, and replacements were something that were definitely needed. At this time, we would have been really close to being. Let me see. So on November 8th of 1942 is when we would engage in our first offensive operation in Europe with Operation Torch in North Africa, where the United States were heavily involved in pushing the Germans out of North Africa so that those troops, first off, so that North Africa and the Mediterranean could be secured for the Allies, and also our troops could be used for attacks elsewhere on the mainland, on the main continent. Um, that they we wouldn't end up leaving North Africa until May 13th of 1943. So around the time that he's going through training, the Germans are surrendering in North Africa, and the Allies are trying to figure out where they're going to go next. And so he is being trained as a replacement for troops either there or in the Pacific, because the Army fought in the Pacific as well. But we know that he's going to European theater, and this is what was going on then.
Real quick before we go to the next clip, I just wanted to touch on something he said at the end of a couple clips back. He talks about how they would show up at a gate and people would
Yeah.
take them home with them for dinner.
I've never heard of that before.
I hadn't either. And he
Yeah.
said that. I was like, and I kind of missed it the first time. But
Yeah.
then I was like, and I just heard it again now. I'm like, oh my gosh. I
Yeah.
mean, think of the stick. I mean, how everybody was helping everybody back then. It's so cool to see how people look out for each other, and especially in your community. But they knew people were having a hard time, and they knew that not everyone had the means that others had. Like the farmers had the cattle and had food and milk and dairy and chickens and all that stuff. And anyway, I just wanted to touch on that. I think that's a pretty cool thing. And I mean, every nation would do that too and stuff, but you just don't hear about that so much in our nation. We've been so wealthy for so long as a country that that's how things were back then. And it's a little shocking. And, it could be like that.
Dude, it's the first time that I've heard, and I think you said the same thing, anyone talk about boot camp saying that. Now, it may have happened in other places. I'm sure it did. Maybe they just didn't remember it. He remembered it, but you got a bunch of homesick boys that are in a strange place. He already mentioned, and he reinforced it by saying most of us had never left our county,
Yeah.
let alone our state. He's from Alabama. Now he's in South Carolina. And he said that the men would line up at the gate waiting for, because the families would be there waiting to pick them up. They did it voluntarily. This wasn't some army program, to bring them home on Sunday, hang out with the family, and have a home cooked meal, which was
Wow.
really, really, really cool. I'm glad that you brought that back up.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'll move on to the next clip here.
Gotcha. So when you went into the military, what were you trained to do? What ultimately was your role in the Army?
Well, I was a rifleman, and that's what you were trained to do, you know. And I was in a rifle platoon. Each platoon had 4 squads, I believe it was, 3 or 4,
Mhm.
best I remember.
Mhm.
And you belong to a squad or a platoon, and I belonged to a platoon, but yet I was in a squad. So many people made up a platoon meant that it was all a light uh, guns, small guns. But the fourth platoon had 60 millimeter mortars and 60 millimeter machine guns. But the three platoons had just plain rifles, M1 rifles.
Is that what you carried? Was the M1 Garand?
M1 rifle. You carried the M1 rifle.
What did you think of? Was that the first time that you had ever shot a rifle like that when
Oh,
you joined the military?
yes, yes.
What was your thought of the equipment that you were issued, like the M1 Garand and all that?
Oh, well, whatever they did, you didn't question it. They were fine with us. Fine
So,
with us.
John, I have a question. What was the regiment that you were in?
135th Infantry,
135th.
34th Division, 135th Infantry.
Excellent.
I was in C Company.
All right. Very good. Awesome. Let me take a time out for a second. I just went off the record.
Yes, hold on. Let me.
Were you wanting me to research the stuff that was highlighted in the orange?
Yeah.
Oh, in the past when you've had so the R's, does R mean Ryan?
No, it just means research.
Okay. Only thing I saw was row 13, Ryan, Monte Cassino casualties. That's all I prepared.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know you wanted me to do the other stuff in gold.
Okay, is that a big deal?
I'm sorry. That's that's why I was like, I wasn't sure. So whenever last night I was like, hey, what do you want me to research? And then I was like, oh, never mind. I found it. I had just saw the Ryan Monte Cassino casualties. And I thought that was what you were wanting me to handle. I didn't realize you wanted me to handle the stuff that was highlighted.
Oh, gotcha.
So I'm flat-footed on all that.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'm not going to call on you for those things.
I'm sorry. I didn't. Damn it. Okay. We got to get a system worked out where I understand what the hell's going on, because I easily, I mean, the goats thing, I brought that up in the phone call the first time, with him and everything. But anyway, I just, now I know. Okay. So, because I think in the past I was thinking that the R stood for Ryan. Yeah, so, and the TL stands for Tony Lupo.
Yeah, and so I'll need to come up with something different. But I did. I sent you a thing, a text message that basically said I colored the orange that I thought would be a good fit for you to cover. But you know how it goes. We can share whenever we want to record them. So
I think at that point I had thought I had found it and I disregarded, thinking, oh well, I just, So
it's not a big deal. So what we'll do is I've done a bunch of reading on this stuff. We'll just share as we go. And in the future, any of the research that I need you to do, I'll just put RF and then TL for me. And then if there's a timeline, instead of using TL, I'll just put time or something else down.
Or if you just want to add another column and put Tony, Ryan, or whatever, I don't care. It just helps me understand what's going on. I'm sorry, man. I'm dropping the ball all over the place for you. Shit.
Because when I did the research on a 135th,
I was like,
there really wasn't much there. So I thought you were just kind of like, they're just another regiment.
I wasn't trying to blow it off. I was just like, I don't know. I don't have anything special to add about they fought in Monte Cassino. That's all I know.
Let's see.
So if you want to cut out that stuff, I mean, and keep what you said, please do, because otherwise.
Well, actually, they did fight in the Civil War, and they were kind of storied now. So I'm going to cut all this out. So let's go back to the Q&A. So we'll just pick it up right now from. He just got done talking about the various regiments, and then we'll kick it off there. So ready?
Okay. Yes.
All right. 3, 2, 1. All right. So the 135th Infantry Regiment, I always find it amazing what the men in the military identify with. As someone who has never been in the military, I identify things at a fairly large scale, like a division, if you were part of the 1st Infantry Division, right?
Yep.
But it turns out that these regiments, each division had 3 regiments of about 3,000 men apiece, and they were typically the tip of the spear. This is the fighting portion of the 15 or 16,000 men who were in a division. The regiments contain the fighters. And 135th initially is basically is an infantry regiment that's still in the Minnesota Army National Guard. During the Civil War, the first Minnesota regiment was the first volunteer regiment to offer its services to President Lincoln. So it has a very storied past. And the other thing that he mentioned, he's in Company C. So with the divisions, generally you have a division about 16,000 men. You have three regiments. Each regiment has three battalions, and each battalion has a number of companies in it. And so the unit that the men seem to identify most with often wasn't the division, because these regiments could be slid around the different divisions. I'm sorry, not the division, but the regiment first, and then the company, which is why when you see like Band of Brothers, like with Easy Company, and they can focus on the company. And I read this really cool thing years ago from Malcolm Gladwell that talked about how companies in the military were originally devised, really in the Napoleonic era, as being the largest group of men where everyone could know each other well. And it
Oh,
turns
wow.
out for most human beings, we can know well about 100 to 150 people in our lives. Those are our coworkers, our family, our friends. That is about the number most of us can manage. I don't mean someone that you just talk to every 5 or 6 years. I mean people that are close to you. So this number in a company really came about because that is about as many men as you could put together where everyone could know each other really well. And he's in Company C. And he also mentions that there was each company, there were different platoons, and each platoon would focus on, some platoons had, most of them had riflemen, but then he spoke of having this heavy weapons platoon, which was also available to the companies, which had the heavy machine guns and the mortars and all that. So now we know we could take it from the top. He's
Yep.
in the Fifth Army, right? He will be in the Fifth Army in Italy, 34th Infantry Division, 135th Infantry Regiment. I don't know what battalion he's in, but he's in Company C.
Gotcha. All
Yeehaw.
right. Yeah.
And we know, and I was really hoping when I asked him questions about what did he think of the M1 Garand and the rifles, and have you ever shot something like that before? I think our audience knows from previous episodes, if you listen to them, that you and I both have a small collection of military rifles that we like to bring out to the range once in a while because of their historicity. And I love listening to these vets telling me stories about the M1 Garand or the carbine or the weapons that they faced on there. I was hoping to take him down a rabbit trail where he talk about that, but he wasn't having any part of it. He basically said they just gave me some weapons and I went out and used them. So
You
I
know, one
guess,
of the things that I've done just a couple of times, twice I can think of, is when I've interviewed a veteran like Bill Parker,
yeah,
or I interviewed Troy Munn, who we have not featured yet, but he was a foot soldier in the Battle of the Bulge. I actually put a M1 Garand in their hands,
yes, yeah,
uh, present day when they were alive, and just had them tell me about it and watch their reaction when they grit it. Like I know Bill Parker, when he got it, first thing he said was, "Oh yeah." You know, and it's like it's so cool. You see them kind of time travel for a second there. They're kind of like hold, and then there's that picture we have of Bill holding the M1,
yeah,
fingers on the trigger,
yeah,
and it's like
yeah.
so cool,
It is, dude. And look, I mean, it doesn't matter if you're a gun person or not. If you're in the military and you're in the infantry and we're interviewing you, that weapon was the most important piece of kit that you were given.
Absolutely.
Because your food and your bedroll, none of that means crap unless you have security. And that's what that weapon provided you, was security, the ability to secure a perimeter and then eat your food and lay out your bedroll and sleep.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of history that goes into and a lot of technology into developing these weapons. I love those stories. I loved it when Bill talked about it. He was a left-handed soldier and they had to
Yeah.
teach him how to fire it right-handed and all that. So, at any rate, I wasn't. I was hoping that we could get John to talk about that, but some guys like that part of the conversation. Some people
Yeah.
don't. John's
The
still
one
with us. Maybe he'll hear this and say, "Hey guys, you want to know more about that? We'll kick it."
Yeah. I mean, the last thing I'll say is the one thing I was always trying to do with Bill and with Troy Munn was take them out to the range and let them fire it.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, I could never, things didn't work out, couldn't take them out there to it, stuff like that. Cause that would have been something you'd film and you would want to, catch on camera because, but these guns, they kick.
Yeah.
And I'm sure for a 95-year-old man, that probably hurt the next day. So,
He's probably like, I don't think I'm pulling the trigger on that anymore.
I'm rubbing my shoulder right now thinking about it. So
I know, dude. So hey, Ray, interesting piece. And now we're going to move on to the next clip where, he's leaving the replacement infantry training center. And this is where he knows, all right, I'm going to be part of the 34th ID. And where am I going and how am I getting there?
So, John, when was it that you went overseas? Was it in 1942?
No, 43.
43. Okay.
Yeah, I went overseas in 1943.
What was the method of transport for you? Do you recall the ship that you were on?
I went over on the Empress of Scotland. They had 8,000 troops on there.
Oh my.
Yeah, I had 8,000 troops on there. And the first person I saw after I got on the ship coming down they said you could, after a day at sea, it traveled by itself. Now, they had convoys that I've heard that some of them would take as much as 30 days because they had to zigzag. But our ship was so fast, it could outrun those torpedoes by in and out zigzagging. First person I saw was my next door neighbor. And after we was signed to our companies, he was killed 3 days later.
Oh, no.
Yeah, there was. Hewlett Miller.
Yeah. So,
I mean, there's a couple of gee whiz things for me here. First of all, the number of guys that they pack onto these ships, I cannot imagine. First of all, I can't imagine. I don't understand how a ship can feed that many guys on these trips. And maybe they stop at ports of call and get resupplied. I'm sure they're just dumping the sewage in the ocean as they go along. But oh my gosh! But just the conditions, and you think about, one guy gets a cold, next thing you know, the whole hold has a cold, or who knows what, the flu. And I mean, anyway, I can't imagine that these guys get off the ship healthier than when they got on. Okay, first of all, and anyway, I guess that's, and then the fact that he got on the ship and the first guy he sees is his next door neighbor.
And he's not from a large town, right? He's from a rural community in Alabama.
What are the odds? Yeah. And it's interesting that he's one of the first guys that he knows about that was killed right after they got into battle. I mean, that's so poignant. It makes you wonder, if God above is kind of giving him one last time to see his neighbor before things change,
I don't know. He said that 3 days into combat and he was dead. And that was not uncommon, I'm afraid, in this type of warfare. And I just want to do, well, I think I'll save the timeline for the next clip, but they're basically, they're heading over into the theater and people are going to die. And you're going to hear more about that. And then the ships that you mentioned, absolutely. I've read several books where they get these men trained, the 101st, as an example, to a really fine point. Like they sharpen their saw, they were ready to go. And then or in the Pacific, they'd spend a month floating across to the battlefield trying to stay healthy, languishing, and they had to get them on the boat and get them back in health again. But
and that's why they have them do calisthenics every day on the deck, because they want you to keep that tip-top form.
And Ryan, it wouldn't be an episode if there wasn't someone talking about the scary submarines. I know you have a neuroses about the submarines. He mentioned being on these ships and being able to outrun torpedoes, and that's an important part of this as well, as a lot of these were luxury liners that could go fast and stay ahead of the
I'm going to hide under the desk for this part. Okay.
So now in the next clip, he's going to talk about his very first impression of the new theater that he has just brought it on into as a combat soldier. Oh, Warrior Next Door listeners, we hope you enjoyed the first episode of the John Little series where he talked about what it was like growing up in the Great Depression and being caught up or swept up in this historical event called World War II. What we're going to learn next week is his first taste of combat, where he would be deployed, and I think we know, spoiler alert, it would be in Italy. And we hope that you enjoy that. We also hope that you enjoyed some of the blooper footage that we left in episode 1. That was not a mistake. While I was doing the editing, my wife Amanda, sitting next to me, thought that some of that was kind of interesting to hear some of the behind-the-scenes banter that exists when Ryan and I are, producing these episodes. So we hope you enjoyed that as well. So join us next week because John is going to Italy and you're not going to want to miss his experiences there. Take care.